Good afternoon everyone and welcome to this meeting of the People Overview Committee. I'm Peggy Mullock and I chair this committee, and I'd just like to ask everybody to introduce themselves to you.
Afternoon, my name's Tanya Mars, I'm the Exec Director of People at Shropshire Council.
Steve Davenport, Shropshire Council.
Ruth House from Shropshire Council at Bishop's Council.
Hilary Lush, Church Stratton and Craven Arms Council.
Kevin Turley, Shropshire Councillor.
Claire Wild, Shropshire Councillor for the Severn Valley.
Peter Broomall, Shropshire Councillor for Wen Division.
Kevin Pardee, Shropshire Councillor for Sundaw.
Matt Green, Shropshire Councillor for Quarry and Coton Hill.
Before we start, I need to inform you that this meeting has been live streamed and recorded. We have apologies from Councillor David Evans, Councillor Roy Oldcroft, who's been substituted by Councillor Steve Davenport, and Sean Lyons, the Diocesan Board of Education. Do we have any disclosable pecuniary interest? Yes, Hilary.
I'd like to disclose that I run a nursery, as we're discussing early years here.
Thank you. Minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of June.
I'll move them. I'm quite happy to move those, Peggy.
Right.
I'll second them.
I went through them because I wasn't here, and there are one or two items that we should have had updates on. I'll have to wait for Daniel to come back. But I'd like to see, one was you, Kevin. You'd brought an item to the agenda. Has it been sorted?
What's that item?
A case that you've been made aware of where support was refused due to the amount of people accessing the service, and that they can confirm she would look into it.
I can't remember any replies to that. No.
Okay. Can I clarify, because I was chairing the meeting that day?
Yeah.
I did have a word with Daniel, and Daniel's got it all in hand.
Oh, that's fine.
So, okay.
That's fine then.
Thank you.
Okay, all in favour of the minutes? Thank you. No, there's no public. Member question from Ruth.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you to the officers for providing a detailed response. But I do have a couple of queries, if I may,
Yes.
on those responses, please. I'm concerned that where families haven't been able to find a place for their child, particularly in areas where primary schools are at capacity, potentially in Shrewsbury, are they offered support with any travel and transport costs to get those children to school? And if there's a fair access panel, just how many young people have had to go through that to get places? Well, I know that there have been positive outcomes from that. And I suppose the biggest one really is the funding that's being provided to schools, and how a school would know when accepting a child or a pupil, just what their route into the UK has been, and should they know, because clearly the route into the UK provides for funding or doesn't provide for funding. And I feel very strongly that the school should be provided with adequate funding, either from central government or from the council, to enable those young people to reach their full potential. And that leads on to my final question around the English lessons. And I can see there's a very comprehensive array of English support for families and adults, but is there anything specific that helps parents to support their children with homework when both parent and child may be struggling with English as a first language?
That was fun. Thank you, Chair. My name's Phil Wilson, Service Manager within Learning and Skills. So hopefully the committee have got the full answers to the questions. Everybody had sight of those already, so hopefully I won't need to rehearse. Go straight to the questions, if that's okay, Councillor. Okay, so the first one's really about how many children of secure places, and the important question, as you quite rightly asked, is about how many children are still without a place. I'm not aware of any children who are currently without a school place. So what we do at this moment is the Ukrainian refugees are treated as in-year admissions, and there was a process where each of the schools deal with those in-year admissions, and that coordinated at the council end. They are dealing with, so schools in effect are dealing with them as normal in-year admissions. They have been processing them since March. Where we have a situation where a child is unable to join a particular year group, either infant class size restrictions where they can only have 30 children, what happens is we've got what's set up a fair access process. So they will apply to the school for a place in the first instance. If the school is unable to accept them and the main reason why they can't is because the school is full in that particular year group, and there's no scope for them to accommodate an additional child. And it's not the fact of Ukraine or whatever, it's the fact is that the school has not got capacity. That then comes back to the local authority, where we then set up what's called a fair access panel. That'll be with officers, with a couple of head teacher representatives. We'll then take that application, and our responsibility in that instance is to find an alternative school for that child. To date, that panel has only had to meet twice over the summer, and in both of those instances where the child was unable to get into the school of their first choice, we found an alternative, a reasonable and viable alternative in both of those instances. At this moment in time, you'll appreciate these applications are happening constantly because they're arriving in the country constantly. We are not aware of any children at this moment in time who have been refused a place at the school they've applied to, and hence there are no currently on our in tray, if you will, to run a fair access panel. So if I'm to take that as a measure, the children who are trying to get places are getting them, but if they don't, we've got this process in place to secure them a place in an alternative school.
Can I ask, please, Phil? So the emphasis then is that the family have to get the child into the school. As a local authority, we don't know who's arriving.
It's like any other arrival into the county, whether they're from another part of the country, if mum and dad have moved into county. The in-year admissions are currently dealt with by schools. Now, the schools bill is talking about that coming back into local authority responsibility, but that's for another day. Here and now, the custom and practice in local authority is in-year admissions are dealt with, the application goes to the school.
Okay.
And then we're in the background to pick up the bits where, as I say, they can't accommodate.
I have to say, having had a family fill in a form for an admission in year, it was fairly straightforward.
It is a straightforward
but there was
form.
capacity. There were no challenges on space.
Okay. So I think I've dealt with question 1 and 2. You did talk in terms of transport. We have got a couple of instances where it's quite interesting, where and we need to deal with those. So we have to keep anything we do regarding the transport of Ukrainian refugees. We have to keep in the context of what our current policy is in terms of school transport. You'll appreciate that we can't go outside that policy to be seen to be favouring them, because again, I appreciate absolutely the reasons why they're in the country and the circumstances they've arrived here, but we have to stick within transport policy. So we have got a couple of instances where we do need to look at, got at least one case where we need to look at a child. The child lives outside of Shrewsbury catchment area, but they secured a place in a Shrewsbury school. Now, normal circumstances, if you go to a school outside your catchment area, it is not the council's responsibility to deal with your transport. That doesn't normally work that way. So we're looking at that case in terms of whether, given these circumstances, we need to find another way in which we can support that family in the short term in terms of getting to their school. But they should have gone to their application for secondary should have gone to their in-area school, but they chose to go to another school. That school accepted them. We normally wouldn't provide transport, but in exceptional cases, we need to have a look at those, given the circumstances. But we need to find a mechanism by which we can support that, and we may be looking to other Ukrainian funding we're getting to support these individual isolated cases, but it'll be considered on a case-by-case basis. But also, I do know that kind of transport team have worked very effectively working with Arriva to get access to bus passes to get around the county on public transport. So there's a combination of things we need to look at in terms of how we can support the families, and Arriva and other providers have been really accommodating in that regard. But we do need to, there will be 1 or 2 cases where we just need to have a look at is there something, but we can't take them through the home to school transport policy because we legally can't. We have to look at other ways in which we can do that in the extreme circumstances, given that we've also got additional Ukrainian funding that we could possibly use in those circumstances. The funding is interesting, and we've been waiting a long time for the department to stump up. So they've been talking all summer in terms of how they were going to fund. So they made it very, very clear in terms of the funding they will provide for schools. So I think in my answer I've given you an indication that any child, Ukrainian child, getting a place in an education setting between 2 and 4 will be entitled to £3,000. Any child in a primary phase, 5 to 10, will get 6,580. And in secondary or FE, 11 to 18 year olds will get 8,755. Now, at the end of August, we got our first payment from the Department for Home Education, and that covered the arrivals in the county between the 1st of March 22 and the 31st of May 22. So any arrivals after that, we haven't had funding yet. And they're only a part payment. They're paying the first 25%. So, for an example, would be they get 25% of the early years funding. So, not rather than 3,000, they're getting 750. Then later this year, the balance of 75% will be paid later. So, what we're doing is there was an application submitted by the colleagues in finance. He submitted a return, naturally, ironically, to a government department for Levelling Up. They sent that return to what they did is they took a snapshot from, there's a government platform system called the Foundry system, and that's the government database in which they match hosts to families. And what we're able to do is extract all of the Shropshire hosts and guests, as they call them, in Shropshire. We then do an exercise to pull out all the children 0 to 18, and then we put that onto our other applications. So that first one was for about 100 children. And then we've got a payment of about 176,000. I now need to allocate that to the schools where those children end up. What I would say, and it's an important point to bear in mind, is that the government scheme is only supporting arrivals that have come through the official government Homes for Ukraine visa scheme. What they are not doing, and we've got at least 27 pupils in Shropshire who have arrived through the Homes for Ukraine route, which is the unofficial. And the reality is that is no different to any other overseas arrival coming into this country and doing an in-year admission. They may have come from Hong Kong. Hong Kong's not a good example, actually. That's one of the ones that probably does well. But if they came from any other country overseas, European country, Australia, whatever, that was an in-year admission to a school, they would not receive government funding for their education. And what they're saying is that children who come through the families route is a different route. It's a normal visa route, but it doesn't entitle them to funding for education. So we have got a bit of a gap there in terms of how we can support those children. Interestingly, though, I think the ones that are in secondary, we are getting funding for the Homes for Ukraine. And so for that £8,000 and numbers, the critical mass of that funding may well be able to support those other children in that school. Because if you get numbers, so we've got at least one secondary school that's got 11 children, Ukraine, so they're getting best part of £48,000 for those children. But several of those children are through the other route. But hopefully that overall pot of funding can be used to support those other children who come through the other route. But unfortunately, I think our hands are probably tied in terms of how we can support that. And even if we were to use, I don't know whether we even got scope to use the other funding we're getting for Ukraine families to do this, to support those. We also set a precedent so far as any other arrivals from overseas, why are they not getting support? So there is an issue there. We have raised it. We've lobbied back to the department on that. So they're clear in terms of we think there's unfairness. I do think the schools who have those will say this is unfair. But we just need to play that back to department. But that decision is really outside of our gift. But I can understand the government reason why they are unable to support the people coming through that unofficial route.
It must be. It presumably is challenging for the schools then, because the school isn't going to know potentially which route that young person's come through.
We're doing an exercise to tell them. We've got an MS form that's gone out to schools this week to get them to let us know all of their arrivals, and I will communicate back to them exactly which routes their children have come through. I'll then lay out whether they get part of that first payment or they'll get future payments. So every school, hopefully by the end of next week, will be clear in terms of which routes their Ukrainian refugees have come through, but equally how much funding they can expect to receive in their school in the next year.
And just for completeness, Phil, would you mind letting committee know what we're doing to track those children that are not in school and what support we're offering?
Yeah, we're looking in terms of the beauty of going onto the Foundry system is you can pull off all the information on the children who are in county. Now there are a number of those children who, the ones that are in school are great, we can identify them. but there are those children who aren't in school. So we're working through with our education welfare service and colleagues in early help to get and track those children down. A lot of instances we're getting indications that at the younger end, I think Ukraine, they start education later. So you're probably 4 or 5 year olds, they're not even thinking about the children going into education. So we need to identify why that's going on. We're also hearing anecdotally that actually quite a lot of children are being educated remotely. So there are still a number of children, particularly probably in the secondary age group, who actually continue to be educated, but they were doing it remotely back to Ukraine. But what we need to do is we need to identify the full picture. We want to know where every single child that is in county. So it could be that they're electing to home educate. That's where our education welfare team will know. So what we're doing is a piece of work to track down all the ones we can identify in school is great. And once we get the data back from schools, we'll have a full picture there. We will then, and we are focusing on the other group of children to identify where all of them are. There is a possibility that some of the children have gone back to Ukraine. So we need to do a piece of work to identify those children, where they are they electively home educating? If they're missing education, then we need to absolutely follow up on there, because it's a statutory responsibility. If they're in an age group, they should be in education in some shape or form. So there's a piece of work we're going in there to map out there. But it's a dynamic situation. It's changing day in, day out. But now that we've got through the summer and things have been a bit clearer, we can now really focus on making sure that every child is known to us and we know exactly where they're doing and how they're securing their education.
If I may, Chair, could I just ask for clarification around those children not in school that you're following up and tracking, in relation to any families, including Afghan families actually with children, who are accommodated in hotels?
There are a number of pupils in hotels as we speak. So again, it's probably important to committee to appreciate that the initial arrivals, the way that people were taken, the hosts took the families in, was they were kind of the initial 6 months. Quite a number of those 6-month anniversaries are beginning to come forward. And so I think there is, at the margins, there are some where they're not extending that hosting a relationship. So there are some, they are beginning, I'm not saying breaking down, they've reached their 6-month conclusion. So I know that Laura Fisher and the housing team are really picking up those places. So there are some children in temporary accommodation in hotels for the short term, but Tanya may be a better place than me in terms of Laura Fisher and her colleagues are sorting out additional further hosts so those families can move to another host family. So there is a little bit of that. If you just think logically, if they've been coming in at different phases and those 6-month anniversaries are going to come every month or so, then hopefully there's going to be a little bit of instability in terms of where they are being housed and homed. So we do need to keep our eye very, very carefully. And in education terms, that can be an issue for us, because if they're in one community, but then they move into another one, then the sorts of transport issues you were referring to become an issue for us, because they might want to stay in the school for continuity of education, but it's not the school that in their catchment area. So we begin to get a few issues like that. My expectation is we'll get more and more of those sorts of cases, but we will deal with them effectively and efficiently, as I would normally expect us to do.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Peggy.
I don't know what the amendment to those present at the meeting on 12th of July is.
Pardon me, sorry.
It's got amendment to those present at the meeting on the 12th of July.
I think this was concerning, I think Roger Evans, who was attending the meeting. Just give me a moment and I'll check the detail.
Okay. Don't go.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, it's Steve. Sorry, wrong one. Steve. Sorry.
I thought you were going to break into song there, Peggy.
I'll come back to that one, Daniel, then.
Okay.
So, Mr. Compton, would you like to come forward?
Thank you. I'm not sure Phil and I got the same.
No, you don't.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you've all seen my paper which has been circulated. It's Steve Compton. I'm the Principal School Improvement Advisor for Shropshire Council. And what I've been invited to do today is to give you an overview of the outcomes from our early years phonics, Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 4 data from the summer. Important to give you some of the background on this data, because obviously over the last 2 years with the pandemic, things have operated slightly differently. and we have to be careful that we're not comparing year-on-year data outcomes. You'll probably be aware that 2019 was the last year when we had a full set of data stretching from early years to Key Stage 4 and post 16. In 2020 and 21 there were no Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2 SATs at all, and at Key Stage 4 we had teacher assessed grades. In terms of Key Stage 4, one of the announcements that came out from the examinations body earlier in the year was that the grades awarded this year will be pegged back to a midpoint between 2019's data and the 21 data, and we'll see that later as we go through. It's very difficult to provide a judgment on outcomes this year because of the impact on COVID. And COVID would have affected each school differently, and equally I think we can argue that COVID would have affected different local authorities differently. One of the things that I would suggest that in Shropshire, schools were not hit hard in the early part of the COVID pandemic, but we did see a high number of cases during the Omicron variant, and that was in the early part of 2022. So I think all of our primary schools and secondary schools were hit significantly in the early part of this year. When we're looking at the data, it's important to be aware that the data that you have in front of you is what we'd term unvalidated data. This is early release data, and there will be some cleansing of the data, some checking of the data as we go through the year, and at various points throughout the year, the data, the final version will be published. So we do have to take some care with some of this data, and I'll put down in 7.6 when the data is published. And in particular, when we start looking at school data as a team, we have to be very careful with the school level data, because again, COVID will have affected different schools differently. Some of our schools experienced significant outbreaks, whereas some of our other schools had very few cases. So I'll provide an overview of each data set as we go through, and then I'll take questions at the end. I'm afraid it is quite data heavy as we go through, and I shan't talk through every piece of data, but give you the main headlines as we go through. So if we start with the youngest and work through to the oldest, section 8 starts off with early years, and I've put on there the 2019 and the 22 data. And as you would expect, locally and nationally, we've seen a drop in the percentage of children achieving what we call the good level of development. That's one of the main measures in the early years data. We have seen our Shropshire data fall fractionally below the national data. So in 2022, that Shropshire data was 65% of children achieved a good level of development, whereas nationally it was 65.2. So Shropshire fell to marginally below the national average. And one of the better measures is what we term the average points score. And so you can see in the table that the average point score in Shropshire is higher than the national. If we move to 8.2, you'll start to understand how the early years data is assessed. There's a whole set of different strands as we go through, and you'll see those starting with the one that starts as communication, and it will move through. One of the positives in Shropshire is the heading for PSE, personal and social emotional. One of the messages that's come out of Ofsted, as you would expect, is the children who were in reception last year, but the children who have had a significant portion, approaching 50% of their life, disrupted by COVID. And one of the things which they will have experienced is that lack of social interaction with their peers. So one of the things we've worked hard at within Shropshire is to make sure that PSE remains high. By a quirk of data, as you look across that data, you will see that in each category, Shropshire is higher than the national average. Yet when we look at the percentage of children achieving a good level of development, it is below the national average. And this can be explained because to achieve the good level of development, children need to reach the appropriate standard in 5 of those areas, And in Shropshire, it seems to be the case that a number of children were reaching it in 4 out of the 5 areas. That would explain why we have the high APS but the lower GLD. That data for early years would not be an area of concern. We have slipped below the national average, but as you can see there, it's very marginally below the national average. Working up through the school years, phonics is the next data set that we have. So in year 1, at the end of year 1, pupils undertake what's called the phonics screening test. Phonics is probably one of the bedrocks of the building blocks, if you like, for education. Getting phonics right allows children to learn better and learn more quickly. We can see that when we last looked at our data in 2019, when we last had a phonics screening test, we were 1% below the national average. In 2020, that gap had reduced and we were only 0.3% below the national average. So although we remain below the national average, there has been that closure of the gap. The year 2 data that's there, if children do not pass the phonics screening test in year 1, they will have an opportunity to resit it in year 2. So the data there shows that we are more successful than our national colleagues in helping children to achieve that phonics screening test result in year 2. So that's a real positive. We then move on to Key Stage 1. And this is where we have SATs, and we'll continue to have SATs for 1 more year. In Key Stage 1, 2023 will be the last year we have SATs for Key Stage 1. Data is split into reading, writing and maths, and we also look at the combined score across those. I shan't go through the data in its entirety, but I'll draw out 1 or 2 or the key points. As you would expect, the area which locally and nationally has seen the biggest drop would be writing, and this will have been the impact of remote education. It's much more difficult for children, was much more difficult for children to undertake lengthy pieces of writing when they were working at home and receive feedback from teachers in school. It was far easier to stay on top of reading whilst working at home. Some of our data there remains below the national average, but there are some positives. So we can see a degree of success in greater depth. So this is the higher standard, if you like, where Shropshire exceeds the national average in writing and maths. And when we look at the percentage of pupils achieving greater depth in reading, writing and maths, in Shropshire that's 5.9% against a national average of 5.3%. So that's a positive. When we get to Key Stage 2, this is where we have some significant missing pieces of data. Because once we look at Key Stage 2 data and Key Stage 4 data, we really want to look at progress scores. Where did the children start and where have they finished? So at Key Stage 2, there will be a progress score published for each child, and they're aggregated to give a school score and then aggregated to give us a local authority progress score. At the moment, we do not have that progress data, and that will be published later in the academic year. In terms of progress score previously, we have been below the national average. Looking at the data, I would expect it to be a mixed picture when we do see that data. I would expect some improvement, possibly in reading, but I think writing and maths will probably remain where it was last year. We can see that when we look at attainment, and again, remember attainment only tells us half the story because really we want to see that progress data. We can see that our attainment data, the data in the report, has seen bigger falls locally than nationally. One of the potential factors in that may have been the impact of Omicron on our Shropshire schools. We're holding head teacher briefings for primary schools next week. We'll be sharing these headlines with our Shropshire schools and sharing with our Shropshire schools what the priorities in Shropshire will need to be. If we move to Key Stage 4, Again, at the moment, we do not have the key measure for Key Stage 4, and that's what's called the P8 score, the Progress 8 score. We do have the A8 score, the Attainment 8, and let me just take a moment to explain what that A8 score is and how it's made up. And the A8 score is a measure made from a child's English score, double weighted, maths score, double weighted, 3 qualifications from what's called the EBAC bucket, and 3 other qualifications. So it's their best 8 that meet those criteria. We can see that Shropshire's A8 score, 48.3, exceeds the provisional national A8 score. I'm stressing the word provisional because the data you have there is very much emerging. Not all local authorities have submitted their data yet, so we could see that data change. But based on the average of what's been submitted so far, we are above the national average. Likewise, the percentage of children achieving a grade 4 in English, grade 5 in English, and 4 in maths. We are below, and we have been in previous years, the percentage of children achieving a grade 5 in maths. Once we have our P8 scores, we'll be able to have a better indication as to how we've performed as a local authority at Key Stage 4. When we move on to section 9, and this is a section we haven't necessarily shared before, this starts to explain the work that we do with schools, partly based on data, but partly based on a whole number of different factors. It explains in 9.1, and I shan't go through it, the responsibility of local authorities in terms of maintaining schools. And the latest guidance makes it very clear that the responsibility for standards in academies rests with the regional director. Regional director is previously known as the Regional Schools Commissioner, and in our case that's Andrew Warren, who covers the West Midlands area. I think it's very important to note what's in 9.3. We've been speaking about education outcomes so far. Very important to say that good education isn't just about good data outcomes, and we want to look at the holistic education, and that's what Ofsted do. And it's a huge positive to say that within Shropshire, we have a higher percentage of good or better schools than there are nationally. 9.5 onwards explains the work that we undertake with our maintained schools. We operate something called Schools Performance Monitoring, and twice a year a range of officers will meet to discuss our schools, our maintained schools, look at not only their data outcomes but a whole variety of different aspects ranging from human resources to safeguarding to governance to finance, and we will put our schools into a category of support ranging from low through to high, and then we provide our support based on the category that they fall into. So our high support schools will receive more visits from advisors than our low support schools. Previously we used to do a similar activity with academies, and now responsibilities rest with the regional director. We are changing how we work with our academies. Part of this relates to the removal of the School Improvement Monitoring and Brokering Grant. Previously we did visit all of our academies each year. We've ceased to do that from September this year, and we only visit our academies in terms of school improvement if the academies purchase a visit, which some of our academies do. We do continue though with those biannual discussions around academies, and we invite a member of Andrew Warren's office to attend that meeting. And for the first time ever in the summer term, we had a member of Andrew's team join us so we could discuss any concerns around academies. I've jotted down there the next steps, but I think those next steps are relatively self-explanatory. So I shall stop there and invite questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I know a lot of us were very concerned about children through the pandemic and how things turned out. So for these year groups that were affected, are we putting any extra funding in or any extra help? Is the government doing anything about it?
Locally, one of the things we are doing is we have introduced training in early years, Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, around language development and communication. And so with the speech and language therapy team, we have introduced 3 programmes called Early Talk Boost, Key Stage 1 Talk Boost and Key Stage 2 Talk Boost. What they allow is for schools to do that early screening of any language and communication difficulty and put in early intervention before referrals are made to organisations such as SOS.
Right. You said we won't be doing SATs.
Key Stage 1 SATs will stop from 2024 onwards. Key Stage 2 SATs will remain. That's because a new benchmarking exercise has been introduced in early years. And so we'll start to have a progress measure again at some point.
Happy with that? No.
Change can sometimes bring lots of bureaucracy. It's how we minimise the bureaucracy.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm monopolising. Okay.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. So I was just interested, Key Stage 1. And I wanted a bit more information really, because you know, the kids obviously, their writing's fallen below the average, not by much, but a little bit. In everything else, we're above the national average. And I just wondered why that was, and also how do you sort of how do you benchmark kids writing, you know, children writing? Because I'm fascinated by how you do that. I just would really appreciate if you explain to us. Thanks.
So in terms of the benchmarking, that will come through the moderation process that takes place. So schools work to the national curriculum, but what happens at the end of Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 is there's a moderation process where local authority officers and staff who we commission from schools will visit a random selection of schools to look at the standards which the schools have put forward and make a judgment as to whether their standards are correct or not and adjust accordingly. In terms of writing, I think in terms of standards more broadly, I think one of the issues that we face is that in Shropshire we have a number of small schools. And small schools lead to mixed age classes. There was a report published last week by the Times Educational Supplement, and interestingly they said that a small school, and they were classing a small school of a school of less than 144 children, and many of our schools are much smaller than 144 children. A school of 144 children or less is 5 times more likely to be judged inadequate by Ofsted than a large school. And that probably indicates the difficulty that smaller schools have with delivering a mixed age curriculum. And I think one of the factors I would suggest that some of our outcomes in Shropshire are lower than the national average because of the very difficult challenge that our small schools have when delivering a curriculum to mixed age classes. And in our smallest schools, we have some schools that are 2-class schools. So they have reception year 1 and year 2, and possibly nursery children as well within a class. And that's a real challenge, being able to have one teacher deliver a lesson or a curriculum to those 4 sets of children at once is a real challenge. And likewise at Key Stage 2, we'll have some classes that will cover year 3, year 4, year 5 and year 6.
And yet the smaller schools are always most popular. You know, everyone's ideal is for their kids to go to a small school. And
I think that explains why within Shropshire we have a higher percentage of good or better schools than we do nationally. Our data is below. Because when we look in terms of Ofsted, we're not just looking at that data, we're looking at the whole breadth of education, which explains why our small schools can be very popular.
Okay, thank you.
Kevin, we'll let you go.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Steve. A couple of questions at both ends of the spectrum, if I may, please.
Looking at the data with the SATs and things like that from last year, have you got data records coming in on how many children are scribed for currently, and that sort of information, and how many children are having the dyslexia paperwork so they can read it on the green paperwork and things like that to sort of...
That data isn't provided to us. We are able just to look at the percentage on SEN support and EHCP, but that won't necessarily provide that. So unfortunately, no, we don't have that. It's not provided. We could do a manual collection of that data, but obviously that would be a manual collection.
I just thinking it would show a little bit more how much greater children are needing support and things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And is it other end of the spectrum when you're talking about PSE and things like that? Because I work very closely in Telford area, this is where my workload is. I hear a lot more sort of children coming in early years, reception and the likes, and now coming in more so in nappies and things like that. So having that sort of issues to deal with, so that sort of falls into that sort of interaction with other children and things like that.
Absolutely.
And have we got a greater, off the back of that, are we having a greater number of children being held back who should currently be in year ones, held back in year reception, children who should be in reception are still being held back in nursery, and that sort of data, please?
We have very few children who are held back. And the term that's used in education is backclassing. The only times we have backclassing occur is when the education psychologist team have accepted that there will be strong grounds for it, because in many cases there is little education benefit to it, and it can have an impact on a child's social interactions with peer, etc. And very difficultly, when they get to year 10 and year 11, they become able to leave school before finishing their GCSEs because they've been held back a year. In terms of, sorry Kevin, I forgot the other part of the question.
The other one was more about nappies and things like that, and it links with the PSE.
Yes,
and,
yes.
And that sort of, is that social interaction? And
It
things like
is.
that, and children.
We are seeing an increase in those children who are not yet toilet trained, not just in reception, but also in year one. And we are also aware that within Shropshire, we have fewer children taking up their early years entitlement through schemes such as 2 for You, which means that they are more likely to be at home. And when they were at home during the pandemic, again, as you said, they weren't having that social interaction.
So just to come back on that, are we seeing a discrepancy between the Shire councils and the urban councils on that, or is it? Have you got that sort of information? What our neighbours have
Haven't seen any data on it yet. No.
It's just because, like with Telford, I know it's sort of quite sort of pronounced in Telford. I don't know whether and that sort of link.
Yeah,
that's great. Thank you.
Just it was sorry.
Was it linked to them?
Yeah.
No. I'll wait.
Are you sure?
Yeah, possibly.
Sorry. Coming into talking about the communication and language and the talk boost you were talking about, and with nappies, obviously that can obviously be connected to physical development as well as their communication and language. So, I mean, I'm using Talk Boost for the 3 to 4, but we could do with, is it going to be coming in for the younger age range as well? Because we need to be picking up their language development when they're 2 and not picking it up, you know, if they're delayed, especially with the delays and the problems with getting speech and language therapy.
At the moment, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll go away and find an answer for you, and I'll get you an answer on that one.
Because it's definitely linked. I mean, the communication and language is definitely linked to
I think we've got a response to that, David. David's kind of doing this.
Sorry, if that's okay, I don't know that I'll respond. So those programmes are intended to run from early, literally from essentially 2-year-olds upwards up to the top of Key Stage 2. What we're also looking to extend into is secondary NFE, which is a gap, because what we're describing here is not unique to early years in primary. We've got secondary colleagues in the room who will be presenting in a moment, and they will be experiencing similar, and that then presents in a different way. You get behavioural outbursts and the like, you know, from some of our secondary and NFE young people. But absolutely, if you're not connected into that, we can certainly have a conversation outside. But Neville and Alison are into that. The figures that I've got, Steve, are 60% of our PDIs, 61% of our school-based nurseries, and 13% of our childminders are already engaged in this work, and the team are relentlessly working through the rest of our colleagues.
There's more training taking place this
There's
term.
a scheme for the earlier age for the 2+ers rather than the 3.
There is, so my understanding is we've already purchased that.
Right, I haven't been. I'm aware of the 3 to 4, but I wasn't aware of the 2. But if there is, that's
We'll double
great.
check.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. A question again about Talk Boost. Steve, you mentioned the referrals to SALT, and we all know that there have been challenges with accessing speech and language therapy. So is there any additional capacity available or in the pipeline to pick up those referrals? Because putting the input onto, the investment in Boost, you still need those ancillary services or critical services to make them really effective.
We would hope that in part, by providing the Talk Boost, it would allow schools to do that early intervention, which might mean that referrals aren't made and therefore take some of the pressure off the SALT service. But I don't know if any other colleagues wish to come in on that one at all.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's a recovery plan in place in terms of speech and language therapy referrals and backlog of referrals, which we have a governance structure within our SEND partnership board, and it's one of, as you know, part of our written statement of action to ensure that we see a robust recovery plan for the speech and language. But you're right, Steve, the Talk Boost is there to try and divert some of these children away from making a referral to the speech and language therapy service.
Thank you.
Okay.
If I could just make a quick comment. So I think Steve in his paper said that with the academies, we kind of move away from that kind of improvement work with the schools, but obviously as your Director of Children's Services, one of my statutory roles is to ensure that our children are in school and are receiving a good education, and so that is still my responsibility, of which I will work very closely with the Regional Schools Commissioner. And one of the reasons why we've invited Shrewsbury Academy School along today is to kind of talk you through an example in terms of what they've been doing differently and the way we've been working as a local authority, supporting the academy as an academy, but obviously in an area of deprivation of which that school is in, and as all wanting to ensure that those children have got the best attainment possible.
Any more questions? No. Thank you, Steve.
Yep.
Do you
Seriously?
Okay. Some of you may remember Julie came to us a few years ago to talk about exploitation and what we were doing, so it's nice to have you back doing a proper job.
Something on this time?
You carry on.
Thank you, everybody, and it's nice to be here, to be invited in today. For myself, and I'm Julie Johnson, I'm head teacher at Shrewsbury Academy. I've also brought my sidekick here, Mr Bishop, Tony Bishop, who's a behaviour and an attitudes director. So the background to where we are at the moment and Shrewsbury Academy is I started at the school in December 2020 as the deputy head. I was still working as the deputy head across 10 schools, 9 schools at the time, for March's Academy Trust with responsibility for safeguarding and SEND. In the June, I was then asked if I would step up as acting head. And at that point, I'd absolutely fallen in love with the school. And for those of you, obviously, Councillor Pardy's here as Sundorne councillor, has the passion for Sundorne and Holscott as I do. Grange is part of the school as well. And then in October 19, the post was advertised and I wasn't going to let this one go. What we've had to change is we've had to change the culture. We've had to change a culture of a school that, at the time, it's now a new school with being part of March's Academy Trust, but was inadequate. And that's not acceptable for my community, it's not acceptable for my students. So we've had to work on a journey a plan to take the school forward. Many of you will have seen where the school is, you'll have seen that the previous Ofsted report, and exclusion rates were through the roof. 2 years or 3 years ago, the permanent exclusion rates were 13 in 1 year group, that's not acceptable. They're now called suspensions again, but fixed term exclusions were incredibly high. So what we've had to do is we've had to change a culture of the way we work together. And for me, I don't believe in shouting. I'm not a shouter. I never have been a shouter. Because what do I get by shouting at my students? My school is a 48% pupil premium. I've got high levels of early help, child in need, child protection, families. I've got 10% EAL. So what we needed to do was to bring the school and the community together through working and an empathetic and consistent approach. It was about changing the culture of staff, changing the culture of how we work with the students. We talk to students, we respect students the way we want to be respected. So it's taken me time, and we are still on a journey, but the journey is not just about the school and about March Academy Trust. We are still in a local authority. That even though I'm an academy, working alongside the local authority has always been something that's of importance to me. Through the safeguarding role, the child exploitation role I was working with, but also in the role I'm in today. And I happily invite the local authority in. I know that Tanya's been for a tour, David's been for a tour a couple of times, but for me, I know Councillor Pardy's been for a couple of tours previously. And it's important that we work together on a journey, because these are still Shropshire students. These are Shropshire students who matter to all of us here around the table today. So for me, it's about how do we change a culture, and that culture is empathetic. We had Mick Adams visit, and Mick Adams said in April 2022 that the school is unrecognisable. Now that to me is part of my journey, to have somebody that we respect for an educational professional to tell us that the school is unrecognisable. It gives me pride, but it also gives me pride that I can present that to the local to the community, but also to the local authority. And I'm happy to show people around the school on the journey we're in. We've put some significant funding into the school to change the facilities, to change the look. We're currently working with the Department for Education on a build that will finally improve the facilities for our children. And that to me is a crucial part. They will have a brand new STEM building to develop that STEM, that science, that mathematics, that engineering, to look at my local community of manufacturing. I should be directing my community into those manufacturing positions. And at the time, the school hadn't got that vocational offer. I need to be working with the community to ensure there's pathways that can keep that community and that industry going. So we've changed the culture. Next one, if that's okay. And what we've looked at is, you can see here, and I'm going to pass on to Tony Bishop to talk through the data. But when we look at our 2019 data and the rates of exclusions, we have halved our exclusion rates. It's still not where it should be. It needs to decrease. But what we're doing, and before I hand over to Tony to present on the data itself, we've looked at what we can do, because I'm one of, I think, 2 schools in the county last year that didn't permanently exclude anybody. Because if I exclude a student, I'm putting them back into the community. Where is that student going? What are they doing? Where's the safeguarding arrangements around that child? If I send out a child on a fixed term exclusion, am I confident that that child is safe? Am I confident that child is going to be educated at home? If I can't answer that question, I shouldn't be excluding that child. I know that exclusion rates are high, but I don't believe in excluding a child because it gets a behaviour problem out of my school. I haven't, some schools have excluded, and I know there's challenge through fair access and there's challenge to every exclusion. However, is it in the best interest of my child to permanently exclude or to fixed term exclude, now suspension? So we've worked out programmes of what we can do. We've set up a support centre, a race centre. I've now employed a brand new Senko, who the chair knows, Laura Richmond from Sir John Talbot. She's now part of the team with myself. We've created a team that will develop that skill set that will support the community. And for me, this is really important, because it's not just about education, it's about the lifelong learning for my children. It's about that lifelong passion. An open evening last Thursday was packed. We had to do 2 sittings of presentations for open evening. 3 years ago, and I'm sure Councillor Pardy will probably confirm, we wouldn't have had that. But this journey to success, and that we will be success for our students, is right here in front of us. Is it okay if I hand over just to Tony Bishop? I will come back, but...
Good afternoon, everyone. As Julie says, my name's Tony Bishop. I've been with the Shrewsbury Academy for 12 months now. I was only supposed to be there for 4 weeks, and I've not been able to leave since. Yeah, my role there is Director of Behaviour and Attitudes. And just from the first 4 weeks when I joined the school, I just noticed that straight away there was a lot of inconsistencies in the way in which behaviour was dealt with, the way in which pupils were communicated with, and the way in which sanctions were put in place. So part of the task with the other deputy head and Julie, the deputy head Jim Taylor, we start to put together a plan of how we can ensure that there is a consistent approach to behaviour right the way through from all members of staff, not just teaching staff, but support staff, the whole school approach to dealing with students. And that was through that consistent understanding that there is a reason behind difficult behaviour and poor behaviour. I don't know whether it's possible just to return to the previous slide. It's a little bit difficult to see on there, but I apologise for that. But just to cover some of the headlines there, as Mr. Compton mentioned a few moments ago, the previous full academic year which we had in schools was the 2018-19 academic year. In that school, in our school at that point, we had 13 permanent exclusions, seven male, 6 female. This academic year just gone, we got it down to 0. The fixed term exclusions in terms of days lost due to that in 2018-19 was 552 days of education or events lost. That's 691 days of pupils' education, which is lost through excluding pupils. This year we were down to 270 events and 471 days. It's still way too high. But again, it is all about changing that supertanker. It's stopping that supertanker. It's making sure that we get strategies in place, the correct provision in place to support students, to support staff, and to support families as well. And you can see there's the information with regards to that. I'm assuming this presentation is available to everyone. And it is very much the headline figures. This was as of July last year. You can see the impact on SEN students. The large percentage of the SEN students are involved in the exclusions, and that is as a result of making sure that we pick up those SEN needs as early as possible, that they're identified ideally through primary school, Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, and making sure that as a school we can provide that correct provision for those students and the correct educational environment for those students. So as if we go on to the next slide, as Ms Johnson says, we've taken a change in strategy. It's about being consistent, but the main thing from my perspective is about building those relationships with the students, understanding the students, getting to know the backgrounds, the problems they face, the issues they deal with, setting clear expectations, making sure that there's a clear behaviour pathway, that all students and staff are aware of that pathway, showing empathy to the students. As I said a moment ago, there is always reasons behind difficult or challenging behaviour, and it could be as they've not got the support at home, challenging issues, not had breakfast, not being able to find the shirt, not being able to get clean clothes on in the morning. There's a whole raft of issues which are facing students when before they even get into school. And a challenge on the gate or a question on the gate could be that last straw for that student, which will then result in a potential outbreak or a negative behaviour event. And as we said, understanding what is correct for the pupil, what is the right provision for the pupil. Is being in mainstream education the right thing for them? Is being in every single lesson the right approach for them? Or do they need specific interventions during the day for the emotional support or one-to-one intervention. And it's identifying that, but it is about understanding the pupils. If we can move on. One of the things which myself and Mr. Taylor put in place was, on your left, you can see a behaviour pyramid. This is a visual diagram and it's displayed in every classroom for every teacher to see as the range of sanctions which we go through. So a C1, a C2 sanction would be and should be dealt with in the classroom at the immediate outbreak of that event, whatever that may be, whether it's challenging the pupil if they've, talking disrespectful and so on. And as you move up through the scale, obviously, dependent on the level of the behavioural incident, we would then ensure that the suitable sanctions are put in place. But again, the key thing is about that communication. It's making sure that staff are following that consistently, which is, you've got to change hearts and minds really on that, because, staff have been teaching their way for many, many years, and it's about re-educating them. It's about making sure the students are aware of that process. And again, consistency is the key. And it is promoted across the school. The students know what that pyramid is. They see it all around the school. And linked to that, if we move on to the next slide, as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the things which I identified when I joined the school was an inconsistent approach to sanctions. So it could be a situation if a pupil was physically assaulted another pupil, dependent on the nature of the name of that pupil, could result in a higher exclusion or a reduced exclusion, and that's completely incorrect. We have to be consistent. So we worked closely with the senior leadership team to ensure that if a particular incident occurred, there was a consistent sanction applied. So there was no, he got 2 days exclusion, or he got an internal exclusion, or she got this. It was ensuring that there was no opportunities for any challenges on that. We had to look at what was the correct and what we felt as a school was the suitable sanction, but that has to be stuck to rigorously. The only time which we look at that is if there's a specific educational need, which can be a contributing factor to that behavioural outbreak, and then we have to make reasonable adjustments to ensure that we are in line with that specific educational need. Gatekeepers as well, making sure that any behavioural issues come through me to be sanctioned by Julie, rather than any member of staff taking it upon themselves to apply a sanction. It all has to be ratified by myself or the other deputy head, or if it's an exclusion event or suspension event, sorry, then it's ratified by Julie or sanctioned by Julie. So that is where that's a bit of an overview really of how we've kind of tried to streamline the process to make sure that it is, as I said, I keep saying the word, consistent. We apply empathy to the students, we understand the students and we get to know them, the demographic, their background, the triggers which could have caused that behavioural outbreak in the morning. And I think that's, oh yeah, sorry, next slide. Who's got the slide button? Oh, you are, sorry. I'm looking around. One of the things which we do make use of now is the what we call it's a wave wall, and this is essentially a process where we try and capture students before they start to end up on behaviour strategies. We start to try and build a picture of those individual students, looking at their educational needs, looking at if they've been involved previously with any outside agencies, ensuring that we understand those students and identifying where they fit on this wave wall. And obviously there's a lot of detail on that, which I can't go through, else I'll be here for all day. But I'd say this is the biggest area now from our school where we need to look at and how we can support the students moving forward is that alternative provision. If mainstream education isn't right for them, or if a full-time mainstream education isn't right for them, where can we support them and how can we keep them in the school but providing that education for them, rather than just thinking, right, okay, let's move them on to someone else or exclude them or permanently exclude them. That isn't the right thing for the young person. So if I have you back to Julie.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. So just to really finish off, what this has been is a journey. We now provide food and breakfast in the morning, so every child has access to breakfast every morning paid through the school. We've managed to get funding from the Department for Education for breakfast, bagels, cereals and so on, so there's no child in Shrewsbury Academy that goes without a breakfast if they want it. We also continue to feed our families. We're on average, during lockdown, we were providing food for 70 families a week. That funding is supported by the Food Hub. We've also had support from other communities. Staff also put food into our Food Hub and put money into our Food Hub bank, so that we have parents, community, even community members that aren't part of Shrewsbury Academy come to collect food and take away 2 food bags for the week, because that's important. What we also do is, alongside the food, we also support uniform. I spent last year £9,000 on uniform for my families, because a student shouldn't be targeted because the family are in a situation. It's not their fault. And we're continuing to support alongside that. What we also do is, I'm not afraid to say that, is I will often, and when we need to, we will make contact with the local authority members. We will talk to the inclusion team. We will arrange meetings with the inclusion team. Even though we're an academy, we are still, as I said, part of Shropshire Council, and that's important to me. And I think, to finish off really from my perspective, is the way we've done it, and it's summarised with me this morning. We have a student who are in very, very difficult circumstances, and there are the three girls that share one bed because the family set up and the housing arrangements. The girl keeps coming up to try, and 2 of the girls keep coming up to try to see and catch up with myself or Mr. Bishop or my other deputy head. And somebody said to them, "But why are you doing that?" And this girl's answer was, "Because they care." You know, that to me sums up where we are at the moment. And on that note, I'll stop.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much indeed. It's so impressive. And I think it's so nice to see people who actually care. And 2 things really. The one is the breakfast club. I'm sure we all have different issues at our school, but one of the issues I have at one of my schools is the school is adamant that it will not let the kids through the gate till a specific time. So the first question is to you is, what time do you let the kids come in? Are you open at 8 o'clock and the kids can come whether they have breakfast or not have breakfast, and you have staff there, is that right? Or?
So school starts at 7:30.
Okay.
We have the gates open at 7:30 for a football club, usually attended by 50 students every morning, and for fitness club, usually around 20 students. Breakfast, they're open, we open the gates with staff, and at that point the canteen is serving from 8 o'clock, but at that point students are in the canteen outside playing football. So yeah, from 7:30 the gates open.
So that is absolutely music to my ears, and it is perfectly possible, and I think that's the thing, you've made all these things possible. And that leads on to the second question really, and the second question was about some of the clubs and sport, because often you can get this bonding doing whatever you want to do. It could be dancing, music, anything, but you have some of those in the morning. Do you have them after school as well, or?
Yeah, we do. So we're working. Performing arts has always been a strength of Shrewsbury Academy, and we've got an amazing director of performing arts. Our productions are well known in the area. We're running Aladdin this year. So we have drama, dance after school. We have session 6s for extra tuition. So from 3:30 through to 4:30, year 10s, year 11s access extra tuition for maths, English, science, art. In actual fact, I'm in a position now, I've got departments fighting over each other because they want to run session 6s. We also continue to run activities at lunchtime as well. So there is a wide range. Duke of Edinburgh, I've just appointed another member of staff to lead on that again, because that's crucial at the weekend to have those experiences. So that's open as well, yeah.
So absolutely marvellous, and and those things make such a difference. And I think, I don't know what we do to get the message out there, but I certainly think people ought to go on Radio Shropshire or something, because people ought to know that how above and beyond you all go, and perhaps talk to some of the kids, because I'm sure they're very happy. Having the opportunity to do all those things must be really good.
It's been incredible. We were asked this week to send a group of students to English Heritage to Boscobel House as part of their promotion.
Yeah.
So Shrewsbury Academy students, we took a small group of students down. So all of the English Heritage promotion is Shrewsbury Academy students. We've also been asked by the BBC to be part of their 100 years celebration. So I've got the BBC appearing again for the second time I was on, I don't know if anyone will see, but during COVID, I presented it on. You saw me, I was there. But I've asked us if we would allow students to be part of their 100-year celebration. So during November, we're due to have the BBC on site to work with our students. So.
But thank you so much. You're wonderful.
Thank you.
Yes, Steve.
I mean, I'm just hanger on here, but why? I mean, you're doing an excellent job. Wouldn't it be prudent to have some of that aren't alongside you in this meeting, so to pass that information on?
Do you want me to pick that up, if that's okay? As I thought, we are doing exactly that. So part of the work in inviting Julie to present here to scrutiny is almost a bit of a launch in terms of exactly that programme. So we have a couple of Ofsted briefing sessions that are coming up, where we've got Ofsted themselves describing what the new framework looks like, but equally what colleagues described in terms of those reasonable adjustments and alternative ways of doing things that are good practice. We're going to use great examples that Julie's described already as part of that to actually articulate that it is possible. I think, and the colleagues described, it's possible. That's the reality, isn't it? It's showing that you can achieve this. We have a marked difference between primary and secondary exclusions in Shropshire. Marked difference. And some of this isn't because colleagues don't want to. Our challenge now is to show them the possible and actually how. So that is the work that we as the council can rightly and properly do. So some of this is around sharing good practice locally, equally developing that from regional and national examples, but putting that programme on, identification of need, understanding why the children and people are behaving
yes,
that
it's
way.
Not shaming anybody, it is you're proving what's the art of possible, as you say.
That's it.
Do you want to make any comment?
Not really. I think there is no doubt that when I visited the first time, when you had the previous head there, it was, I noticed the difference then in behaviour. We had, ever since day one of the academy becoming academy, it's been fraught with problems. I remember we had a head there who told me she'd worked in Moss side and she'd sorted out. She disappeared. We had an enforced administration there, and the guy told me he was a whistleblower and never failed. He disappeared. And now we had the marches come along, and it seems things have improved. Well, they have improved. I remember in my time being there in and out of the school probably 2-3 times a month with problems. I think I've written to you once in the last couple of years. So on that, on behaviour and the changes in schools, I see positives, and I'm really pleased about that. And of course, when that happens, when you have these improvements, it's not just about what's within the boundaries of that school. But I'm not getting complaints from constituents, the people in my ward, about problems after school and that sort of thing. There are problems in the evenings and late at night, and there may be some of these people may come from the school, I don't know. But coming home or going to school, I used to get so many phone calls, and I'm not getting them anymore. So it's not just good for the school; it's good for the community. And I do congratulate the school on that, because I have to admit, after the guy told me he'd never failed and he did, I thought, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And it's not only that, you know, people talk about the school in a negative way, and that leads to the community being spoken about in a negative way. And I'm proud to live in Sunderland. You know, as people look down their noses at Sunderland, but it's a great place to be. So I thank the Academy for that.
I know you've shared concerns with us before in the past, haven't you? So that's why it's important to hear. And I mean, if you know Julie, she will never give up on anything. End of. She truly does care. So thank you both for coming today. Really appreciate it. You know, it's good for us to hear about the good work going on in our community.
I just have one more comment to Julie, if I may. So it's a great example, as you rightly said, Kevin, there in terms of how having children in school every day and supporting and caring for children to have hope, to have aspirations and believe in themselves and the results that we can see in front of us. But Julie, would you mind just summing up in terms of how many children sat their GCSEs this last summer? Because I think the committee will be very impressed by what you're about to say.
So when you look at the schools data historically, again, previous Ofsted reports, what I'm proud to say is that the year 11 that have just gone, their P8 data, their Progress 8 data has improved since the last comparable data in 2019. The A8 data has improved since the last comparable data of 2019. We also had 54% of our students take EBAC, which is they have to take, obviously it's English, Maths, Science, it's also a foreign language alongside a humanities subject. EBAC is recognised, nationally recognised by universities. Historically, that's been down to 9%. We've now made a significant change in the students taking EBAC qualifications alongside vocational. What we've also done is we've looked at pathways that haven't worked for our community, for our students. So the GCSE PE, which is very, as an ex-PE teacher, that course is tough. And actually it's very theory based. The Cambridge Nationals is a brilliant course based on coaching, teaching. We've now got our percentage rate of Cambridge Nationals. We've changed the course 100%, with the first ever top award. She was 1% off 100% for that Cambridge award, which is incredible. So this isn't just about the behaviour, it's about changing that culture of expectation. And I had one of my ex-students who had a tough time and was originally a difficult student, her very, very difficult background with crime, criminality. And I said to him during the year, whatever it takes, you are not going to go. You are not going to be excluded. I'm going to get you through. He finished, he came to collect his results. He said, Miss, you did it, didn't you? And he shook my hand. And I have had another young man who collected his results. He's a young man with an education, health and care plan, got his grade 5 in English and Maths, looked at them, shouted to his mates who said, no, you got the wrong one. He then threw his arms around me, Miss, I'm going to give you a hug, and just hugged me. You know, it's a culture of change from reducing exclusion, but to changing academic performance as well.
Can I just say, Peggy?
Yeah.
Peggy, we congratulate this school upon what it does in the mornings with breakfast and that sort of thing. I don't want that to become a norm, and we must all look forward to the future so that there isn't a need to do that sort of thing. And that goes through all schools. Thank you.
You're free to go. Thank you so much and well done.
I hope things are
Job well
have
done.
my phone on, so thank you.
Oh, Phil, you can come now.
Chair,
Yes.
if I might, we just go back to the previous item, please.
Oh,
We'll be
yes.
around the minutes.
The amendment.
Yeah, that's right. Just a brief thing, really, just to for the record more than anything. The committee met on the 12th of May, the first meeting of the year. Present at that meeting were councillors Roger Evans and Caroline Bagnall. The meeting, at the meeting on the 23rd of May that you held, the minutes for that meeting note in section 41 that Councillor Roger Evans substituted for Councillor Matt Green and Councillor Caroline Bagnall substituted for Councillor Pardee, and their attendance is noted on the website as well in terms of the attendance. However, their names weren't included in those councillors present at the very top of the minutes. Because the minutes have been agreed, they can't be amended. So what we agreed to do was to make this statement to the committee just so it could be placed on record and into the minutes that indeed Councillor Roger Evans and Councillor Caroline Bagnall were present at the meeting on the 12th of May.
Thank you. I do apologise. In the apologies was Councillor Kirsty Knight, who's away, and Councillor Nick Bardsley is here in her place. Sorry. There you go, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, colleagues. It was a year ago I was here to present to you around school place planning, and that also was preceded by a development session for councillors. So I don't know about you, but that year seems to have flown, and I can't believe it's only 12 months ago that I was here. All I would say in the context of school place planning, it's been a busy year, and I think we've got some real things to celebrate, which I'll very happy to do that now. So
Sorry, Claire's got a hand.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. Sorry.
If we're changing items, should we have had a resolution to the first
Sorry.
item? Just note the recommendation.
Yes.
So, sorry, Phil.
No, that's fine.
Introduce you. Interrupt your train of
So the recommendations were that the People Overview Committee note the report and that a future update is requested, including Key Stage 5 once nationally validated assessment information is published.
Yeah, just so long as everyone's happy. I mean, I presume everyone was very happy. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want a show of hands on that, just to make sure everyone's happy?
Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry, Peggy.
No. Thank you. Okay. So yeah, it was a year ago I was here. So it's been a busy year. So I just want to update the committee on what's happened in this busy year, but also to us in terms of the way things are going moving forward. So since we last reported, two major significant school place planning projects were concluded. And again, it's important to understand, and you'll appreciate that these things don't happen overnight. These are kind of multi-year planning processes getting into lead up to that. So it was really good. And also it took the context of the place plan programme that started back in 2016. We're getting to the end of that now, and I'm going to talk about the next round of work we need to do to get the next programme. But we had two really, kind of two of the biggest projects within the overall programme. So we've delivered the new 5-class teaching block at Millbrace School. If you ever get a chance, just look at the tiles, the comedian tiles on the side. You go to one bit, it's one colour, move around a bit. So it's but it's a fantastic building. It's a passive house as well. So it's really to a very high energy standards. So really great school there. But also the expansion at Harlescote Junior and the relocation of Sundell Infants and Corndon Crescent onto the Featherbed Lane site. Another fantastic school in the north of Shrewsbury, which we're very pleased with, and the school are settling in. But it's interesting that Julie and Tony just left, but they're doing fantastic work, which you heard about there. But because we've released the Corndon Crescent site now, we've now transferred back that to Shrewsbury Academy Trust. So the Shrewsbury Academy site has now got space to expand into. We've got the former Green School site back into council ownership. But the point about that is that there is now initiating a £10 million plus capital project on the Shrewsbury Academy site. Now, Julie had a passing reference to the STEM block, but just think about everything they're doing. But now there's going to be a £10 million investment into that build as well, and the buildings for those young people. So take that together with the major investment in at Horman Federation, and the investment, £20 million plus, I'm going to say at the end of the day, across two schools, or three schools if you count the two schools as separate. Major investment in perhaps one of the more deprived areas in the county. So major significance. So you can imagine what Julie and her team are going to be able to do with the buildings they're going to get in 12 months or so of time. So really exciting times for that particular community, and gives Julie and colleagues a real opportunity to build on that. So they're really successful ones. The other big one that's coming through as part of that original programme is the new schools in Bowbrook. the specialist school, and the mainstream primary school. I'm really pleased to say that yesterday we got the planning consent for that, the planning determination, so we're all ready to go. Tight programme, but hopefully by September 23 we will have the new school up and running, the special school, and the first intake. We're building the primary up from reception upwards, so we won't be filling it from day one. We'll build up gradually from reception and year group, so it'll gradually grow up. But another fantastic build in the pipeline for Shrewsbury. So that's getting to the tail end of the current programme, and we're very pleased in terms of what we've been able to deliver against a backdrop of 2.5 years of the pandemic and everything else besides that. So the way that we've been able to do that with most of the meetings online, and the contractors able to get us on site and work carefully and effectively, is really something we're extremely proud of. So we're coming to the tail end of that. A few things to conclude, and a few more exciting, but now we're giving our mind to the programme going forward, which I'll come on to in a moment. So we're looking, I think when I met last year, I probably said we were hoping to get the exercise underway this term. We're probably going to delay a bit until we get into the spring. Part of the reason for that is the local plan is still yet to be adopted. So we want to make sure we've got the proper information. So the local plan, and again, it's a paragraph 7.5, just gives you some information that Eddie West and his colleagues, just in terms of the draft local plan has been submitted and planning inspectors are carrying out the examination. So they're holding hearing sessions, and I know full well that's impacted us because they've been asking questions about some of the education provision within those hearings. So again, it's the continuation of that examination process, conclusions reached, but hopefully the draft local plan will be adopted in the new year. Then we begin on the back of that all the work we need to do. But we've been engaging with planning development officers for many years. So the sort of developments that are in there, particularly around the strategic sites at Iron Bridge, the initial ideas in terms of what they're going to be doing at Tatsley Village, the village, Garden Village community there. There's also Turnhill. We've met for a number of years about Turnhill. That one's kind of down to when the MOD moved the Irish Regiment out. But also, I mean, I've been having meetings with land promoters in Bowbrook, the site to the south of the. We've been meeting with them well in advance of the local plan. So just to assure colleagues that we don't come and say, let's sit and wait for the plan and then we'll act. We've been constantly working, planning and paving our way forward on that. So I believe we're well placed to continue the good work that we've been doing. I mentioned previously that when we met last year, is that the school rebuilding projects programme, we've got 2 schools in Shropshire, Belvedere School in Shrewsbury and St Andrews in Shirehall. So they're continuing those school rebuilding programmes. Belvedere School has got planning permission, and so they're on track to start. I haven't been up that way recently, to be honest with you. I don't know whether the contractor's on site, but we're looking at September 24 for that school to be completed. So they're getting underway. We've had all the surveys done at Shirehall, St Andrews and Shirehall. So we're getting to the stage where they're now beginning to bring the tender documentation to go out to secure a contractor for that. And then we've had our pre-planning has been approved. So all the pre-planning exercises have been completed. So that one's moving along forward. But they were in phase 1 and phase 2 of the national programme, but the government then has approached local authorities and academy trusts and said, have you got any other schools that they want to be in future phases? So that exercise was undertaken in March. We put I think for maintained schools, we put a 6 forward that we would like to be considered for future phases. They've come back on 2 of them. So I'm not going to say they're in the programme yet, but they've got through the first stage, the triage process they go through, the process they go through. So we've got 2 schools currently are working with us and the department about possibilities of being onto the programme down the line. They came out and did site visits this summer. We haven't heard what the conclusion of that, but we're in the game. If you're in the game, we've got a chance of winning the prize. So we've got another 2 possibilities coming down the line. I don't want to perhaps put them out in the public arena because they may not amount to anything, and I don't want to raise expectations when there's a possibility they might. So if I can absolutely, in confidence, I could share that outside of this, but I'd probably not get it out there because it's a possibility they may not materialise. But we have got a couple in the pipeline. Yeah. The other backdrop to everything we're doing is the government white paper, Opportunity for All, and the schools bill and the government's objectives in terms of the school system going forward. And a particular sort of thing you may well have heard of is that they would like all maintained schools to be academies or part of Multi Academy Trust, a strong academy trust, all moving in the direction by the end of this decade. So we need to have that in the background in terms of what we're doing. So there's a few paragraphs in terms of, I just give you an indication of how that relates to school place planning in particular. So there will be some different expectations on us in terms of how that works. Key to this will be about the relationship and the partnership with ourselves, Academy Trust and Department. That's got to be strong because this won't work otherwise. If we need provision in a certain place, but Academy says, no, we don't want to do that, doesn't fit with our ethos, we've got to have the wherewithal to work collectively to deliver the best outcomes, the best provision in the best place for our young people. So the legislation is going to strengthen that position and make it much easier, or hopefully more straightforward. We've not experienced any negativity on that regard anyway, so when we've approached academies for expansion, we haven't had any of those issues, but that's not to say that one day there might be an issue. So we need that framework to work so that we don't get into that situation. But the regional director, there will be much more influence from the department in terms of what we're doing. We can't just go ahead. So that we will need to keep the Department for Education and the regional director cited on what we're doing. And part of that process is they will want to know how we're doing our school place planning, what methodology we're using. So I'll just the reference here in the fact that our school place planning process, our methodology will be quality assured by the department. So part of the exercise we're doing at the moment is we're preparing for the next round, going forward for the next place plan. But what we're going to do is we're talking to the local government association, LGA, to perhaps get an associate to come and give a quality assurance of our process to make sure we're fit for purpose, so that if we get a department coming on later, we can put a badge here and say we've had it externally assessed, monitored. My sense is, given the success we've had to date, it can't be that broken. But there's always things you're concerned. You never be complacent. There's always stuff that perhaps could be better, more effective. So we want to learn. So there'll be a little project underway, hopefully completed this year before that. And we'll use that then to make sure that when we go out to schools, communities, with the data, with the impact of development on their local communities, and we have those local engagement events in the communities, then we can be as sure as we possibly can be that the data we use is robust and where it should be. But there is another aspect to that why it's important for us, is because, and Claire will know full well, because again, around SIL, we need to go into that arena where there are competing calls for community infrastructure levy. We've got to go into that arena with the evidence base of why we need it. We need it to be robust. We need to link it to our statutory requirements. So we've got to make sure that data going into those arenas to help Eddie West and other colleagues who are dealing with this, to make sure that it's clearly understood that education isn't just asking this money because we can, it's needed, and we can demonstrate the need through the data that we've got, again, as I say, which is being quality assured and assessed by externally. So really exciting times in terms of that. We're just at the beginning of really the next stage, and we've got 6 years more experience than we had 6 years ago, and I think we can get that to play to support us working that. But also there's some other things there the government is moving, and it does fit with that agenda in terms of their reshaping of the school system. So there's a reference there to a SCAP return, which is a return in terms of the surveys we're doing. We've done that for mainstream schools for a number of years, but they now want us to do that around early years provision in due course. But the next really is about specialist provision and alternative provision. So when we do this exercise, we go out to our schools community. We didn't not reference specialist provision and alternative provision and early years provision in our exercise, but that'll be writ more large. So those of you around previous will see SEND and AP and early years into the way that we conduct our conversations with our school communities about where we're going to need that provision. So that will feature very strongly, but the government is really also wanting to know where the SEND provision is, where the physical capacity is. So we'll be having some technical work to be doing with the department to understand that, but we will feed that into the process in terms of the place planning going forward. So there's a lot going on. A few things to celebrate, but and again, the commitment was given last year, and again, it's their chair in terms of we can come back to the committee and regularly in terms of where we've got to and keep them absolutely fully up to speed and abreast of all the developments.
Excellent.
So
Can I ask a question? It's not really related to your subject, well, it is in a way. So, unusually on the Harwood development in Ironbridge, 5.5 million was allocated to the building of the new primary school. Okay, so obviously that agreement was reached last year. Construction prices have gone up, and so really it's relevant to all the other schools we're going to build, really. So who's going to actually build the school? Are they going to build the school, or are we going to use that 5 million to build the school?
We've got the options, to be honest with you. We've got that still in place. So the legal agreement, as the Section 106, on my understanding, gives us latitude to go. The conversations we've had with to date has been actually that if they've got contractors on site, there may be value for money in terms of the contractors on site building the school, and we may well get that more economically. If we were to procure our own contractor to then to go onto a massive development site, I personally feel there may be difficulties in doing that. But I think there is a value for money argument here, and I think when we get to that stage when we need that school, and there is precedent for Harworth building the school on the other developments they've done. So I'd look to the best way to make that work.
As long as we get, it's just, I just wanted to point it out to members, because it's not usual to have the 106 money. Usually, you know, you get your money through the community infrastructure levy money. So actually you get the money much later on.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's inflation proofed.
Yeah, the Section 106 is index linked, so we should see that.
Right, okay.
So all the other Section 106s we've seen, I've got a figure that we planned for it, but then they come along from planning and say actually it's gone up because it's been indexed. So that will hopefully, probably not with inflation.
So we all understand,
but it will keep a little bit of track.
So we all understand about the SIL contributions for education, but actually they're all, you know, it's quite unusual, I think, to have.
It is a mix. So again, there's meeting with other colleagues, Tracy Dark and other colleagues about the Section 106. But we want to make sure Section 106 for education is much easier. It's money, it's ring fence for education.
It is, apart from when you have the planning 12 months ago, and of course the money you've got is worth so much less.
Absolutely.
So the advantage about SIL is that, as I say, if you get the prices go up, so you get a larger amount of SIL payments.
Yes.
So it swings and roundabouts, really.
It is, yeah.
So whilst you may say it's straightforward, yes, but you might not have enough to do what you want to do.
Exactly. So we need to keep an eye on that. Again, so what we don't want to do is have to keep coming back to Cabinet and whatever to get more topping up with the SIL. So that's we need to get it right.
Yeah.
But all I'm saying is hopefully through this process we will be able to demonstrate to councillors what our plans are for education for the next 5 to 10 years. And that will have a price to it. So then we start those discussions. We've got basic need funding, we've got capital receipts, we've got other elements. So it's not wholly resting on developer contributions, but the lion's share of it will be coming from developer contributions, because the only reason we're having to do it is because developers are building houses. So we can certainly have that, but we're getting in early. And so for education, we will be making clear what our position is and what our requirements are for the next 5 to 10 years through this process.
And thank you very much for a very clear presentation. I always enjoy your presentations because you speak so clearly and you never use acronyms all over the place. So thank you very much indeed, Phil.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I may ask 2 questions. Firstly, the Meal Grace development at passive. Oh, sorry. The Meal Grace development at passive house standards, I think, is really commendable. But in a sort of related question, perhaps not directly linked to place planning, but is there capital available for existing schools to improve their sustainability?
What we've got for maintained schools is we get what's called an allocation called school condition allocation. It's a government grant for us to it's really to do with suitability of schools. That has not been inflated or uplifted to deal with that agenda. So at this moment in time, we are not getting additional inflated budgets to support that agenda. So if we have a small scale project going on in school, we will try to raise the bar in terms of what we can do. But realistically, we are not getting any additional funding. So if we push that bar too high, my concern would be that we can't do as much. So if you imagine that budget can do 20 school projects in a year, if we've got to do more to get to a higher specification, then it might be we can only support 15 schools. But the other dimension as well is if some of these are kind of maybe just a new entrance to a school, the reality in terms of the impact on the energy efficiency of a school by doing the front lobby is completely lost if the rest of the school has got poor fenestration. And so you only really begin to realise the dividends and the benefits of major investment in school place planning if the project is of scale, and you can do a whole teaching block like the one at Meal Brace, or what we've been able to do at Holland Federation. You've got to be able to scale to get the real returns on that. When we've got the small scale projects, it might be 30, 40,000. It's really quite hard to deliver the energy efficiency. But please be assured, Colleagues in PSG who lead on these and contract for them are going on the standard building specifications, but we're adding maybe 10% in terms of the expectations on the contractors to address and make it as efficient as they can in the context of the build. Bearing in mind that we can't do that throughout school. If someone could come along and give you £700 million, we could do it across all of our schools, but that isn't going to happen anytime soon, I don't believe.
The reason for the question is a concern of rising energy costs and schools being able to afford those. And, and then the payback on investing in alternative energy sources.
Well, we are talking through Adrian Cooper and the colleagues in that, so we are looking at those sorts of things, but some of this might be that schools themselves, particularly if you talk to academies, so they may need to start to be a bit self-sufficient, look at the obvious quick wins themselves, and we'll use our money as effectively as we can, but I think we've got to be realistic about what we can realistically do with the monies we've got available.
Chair, a second question. On your place planning for SEND, and I'm not expecting an answer, and it may be something for a future agenda item, as to whether there is any correlation between the recent maternity scandal at SAF and the challenges that have come out through that the Ockenden review, and whether that's having an impact on the number of SEND places we need going forward in Shropshire.
I don't know whether David's got a response to that.
Thank you. It's a pertinent question, to be honest, and I think what we can see in Shropshire is some variance from the national in terms of profile of SEND need. So we do see some differences. So we're exploring exactly that that process and profile to understand why is it looking different. Is it in terms of identification profile across schools and early year settings? Is it those kind of challenges? What is it, and how do we support all to understand that and move forward beyond that? So we are undertaking some of that work actually, and it will take time to unpick and analyse that, particularly with colleagues in the health sector. And Tanya has also worked with the ICS board, let's say, to develop an opportunity to have a forum together to really look at the complex nature of some of our children and young people with more profound, complex health, physical health and mental health needs, and how we are supporting them and are we supporting in the most appropriate way.
I wasn't expecting that for an answer, actually, but it might be a future agenda item. Thank you.
Councillor Barsley, you want to have a word?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Typically with Phil Wilson and his team, he's rather skipped over the achievements that are set out in paragraph 7.1. Some of us, many of us perhaps, will remember when this idea of expanding Harlescott Junior School and relocating Sundon Infant was first canvassed many years ago. And I think we all thought, goodness me, that's complicated and difficult and so on. And I'm sure it has been complicated and difficult. And I think, it's a great scheme. It's worked out on time, actually at a very difficult period in the life of Shropshire Council. So I think David and Phil and the team have really achieved something quite remarkable. And I just want to say, because I was involved very intimately in the initial thinking, it's a great scheme. Well done, everybody. Very, very successful. Thank you, Chair.
There you go. You weren't expecting that, were you?
I wasn't. Thank you very much indeed.
Sorry.
There'll be others. There's a team effort. I mean, I've got to extend that credit across a whole range of colleagues, not least PSG and the school themselves, actually. So there's a lot of people involved in it, but thank you very much, Councillor.
Kevin, did I see your hand?
Thank you. Yeah. Sorry. I wanted to thank all the officers this afternoon for all the talks and everything else. But I do have a personal thanks to Phil, because if I've ever got an education, and Nick stole me thunder a little bit, but ever I've got an educational question, I use Phil as a first port of call, and he's always there, helpful, supportive, and pointing me in the right direction. So I can't thank him enough for the 9 years of support he's given me.
Thank you.
Well,
I mean,
I might start filing on myself, because some years ago Phil and I had a couple of years of pulling our hair out, didn't we? And joining two schools together in St Martin's, which is still all through school in Shropshire. and it took one hell of a lot of doing, and we had some sleepless nights on that one.
We did. Interesting times. But we got there.
We
got
did.
there.
Sorry, you did.
No,
That's what
they
you
stood it for me.
answered.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we note the report. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nice to see something good happen. So, back to the agenda, work programme, Daniel.
Thank you, Chair. Daniel Webb, Overview Scrutiny Officer. I'll table the proposed work programme to you. We had a delay in putting together the items for safeguarding, criminal exploitation, which we were meant to do at this meeting. However, there's been insufficient time to prepare that. I've been in close contact with the Assistant Director, and they've set up a series of meetings with the partners to prepare the work for that, and I'll be involved in that preparation as well. So it'll be a single item agenda. The Chair believes that it's such an important topic and so fundamental to our work here that she wanted to devote a single item to the agenda. This has caused all the other items that we agreed to at the previous meeting. I've moved those along one meeting further. I noticed a lot of addition that we've just agreed to bring back school attainment at some point at the verified data, the validated data has arrived for you. So I expect that will probably be around January, David? Is that date?
Yeah, it can be slightly later than that, so if we could table it for February or March, that would be ideal. Normally we don't get the publication of Key Stage 4 until early January.
Well, March it is then, I propose.
Yeah, that's fine.
So the work programme is presented to you for approval, or any other changes, additions, deletions that you may wish to make.
Good.
Okay, that's fine.
I would urge everybody, if they can, to attend the next meeting, because it is a subject very dear to my heart, and I just want to know our kids are being looked after well.
There'll obviously be an opportunity for member questions. Doesn't matter how many we submit. Once we've got through six volumes.
No, it's fine. That's why I just want one item. I just want us to really, deep dive. Is that the word?
Yeah.
Can I just make a suggestion? Obviously people can ask questions. That's great if we have 20 or 30 questions. But perhaps if we do have that number of questions, if we can go with the written answers so that we can actually get into the meat of the, and interview the people, rather than spend 45 minutes on members' questions. Do you know what I mean? Because it will, hopefully, the biggest bit will be listening to what's being said, and we can pick everything else up at the end, Ruth, can't we? If there's anything that's missed.
The request is for the opportunity to ask.
Yeah, and that's right. But if we have too many, it'll be.
And the focus that I've asked colleagues to consider for the 16th is around what are we doing as a system, so across the police and social care and health, in terms of what we do to disrupt exploitation, to prevent exploitation, and how do we protect and support young people who we know are currently at risk of exploitation. So those 3 areas I wanted to focus on, so hopefully members you'll then be able to have your questions answered or ask questions.
Yeah, Chair, can I? You may remember, some of the more long-standing committee members may remember, we looked at this topic in quite some detail in 2019. It's a topic that's become particularly prescient in recent years, and the Local Government Association have printed a very user-friendly guide for councillors to scrutinise precisely this topic. So before that meeting, I'll send all of you a copy of that. It's a really easy read, but it gives you some really useful pointers in terms of the areas to look into to determine whether the system, as Tanya might, is working effectively. So if that's okay with you, yes, Chair, please. I'll circulate that document in advance of the meeting.
No, you can't, because I haven't said the date of the next meeting. It's, you can, we'll have you back.
No, you won't.
For the glory. 16th of November at 10 o'clock. Thank you, everybody. I think you enjoyed today. I think it's been good. You enjoyed it, Stephen?
Well, yes, it's not